In this tutorial, we will take a look at all the different modeling techniques that are needed to make the finished model you see on the screen. We'll start by modeling just one of the leaves, a single acorn and the stem, before we copy, rotate and scale the leaf and acorn into multiple locations and combine with the stem. We will then mirror the completed branch across to the other side to complete the design. So this is where we're heading, but let's start by creating a new part. So under File, New, we're going to select a part that's just a single-sided. It's going to be 12 inches in width, 3 in height and 3/4 inches thick. Our Z0 will be from the material surface. Our XY datum will be in the center, and we'll select the middle option, high, for the modeling resolution. So with that, I now have my blank job space and I need to read in a start point for the design. In this case, we have a hand sketched representation of what we want. This has been scanned on a scanner to create a JPEG, and now we're going to read that in over the top of our job space. So up to the import bitmap, and I'm going to read in oak leaves sketch.jpg. And we can see that represented in the center of our space, but unfortunately it's not the correct size given the fact that we're working with a 12-inch workpiece. So with that, I need to scale the image up. So I'm going to come across to transform objects now and just leave link XY on to make sure that it scales in height, even though I'm only modifying the width. So with that, I specify 12 in width and apply, and we can now see the image full size over the job space. Okay, at this point we need to start moving ahead and creating some vectors for our leaf, the vein running down its center, the acorn, and of course the sort of stem or branch running through the middle. But given the time constraints of this demo, we're actually going to read in some pre-created vectors that have been saved out. So with this, I'm going to come across the file operation, select the import vectors, and I'm going to pick this oakleaves.eps file, but this could be DWG, DXF, etc. But in this case, it's an EPS file. We're going to read that in, and you can see that those vectors have been displayed over the top of our model. We've got those that form the acorn, and we've got those that form the leaf, and of course the stem. Now, given the fact that we're working with quite a large workspace and the acorn and leaf in particular are small, we're actually going to model those in a separate Aspire session with a smaller sized workpiece where we're going to get a greater sort of resolution over a smaller space. So with that, I'm going to select just the leaf here, and we're going to copy that out now. So I've got both vectors selected, and I'm going to select copy from the file operations, and then I'm just going to pop open a new session of Aspire and create a new file. Okay, so this new file, and the part is just going to be 2 inches by 2 inches, which is just a little bigger than the vectors. Okay, and we can actually see the size of those vectors by, whilst they're selected, if you have a look in the bottom right hand corner, you can see width 1.35 by a height of 1.29. Therefore, when we go to the new session, I'm going to create a part 2 inches by 2 inches, exactly the same settings for all others, and just OK that. And then whilst that's on the screen, I can just hit paste now to read in those vectors. And you can see there that they've been written out with respect to the coordinate system of the existing session. Therefore, they've not come exactly into our workpiece, but certainly where they were with respect to the original coordinate system. So what I now need to do is just move these into the center. Well, that's easily done under the transform objects. Select the align selected objects and select the align to material and hit the center one, which is going to center in X and Y. Okay, so we just close that down now. Now we can start thinking about how we're going to model this acorn. Before we start taking a look at the modeling functions, let's appreciate really how we're going to go about building this leaf. Well, really, it's a sort of 3-stage process, or sort of a 3-model process. First of all, we're going to create an underlying shape for the leaf, which will be using a 2-rail sweep surface. So we're going to need to build some extra vectors for that. We're then going to take that shape and limit it to this external vector to remove material from outside. And then whilst that's selected, we're then going to create like a dished shape to give it a little bit more internal curvature to the leaf. And then following that, we'll take the central vein and create a raised profile down the middle. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to create the vectors to form the 2-rail sweep. So I'm going to come across now to the polyline tool and start creating the vectors. Notice I've switched off my geometry snapping and my smart snapping because I'm just doing some free form tools, and it's just a little easier than trying to snap to individual items if I switch those off. So with that now, I'm just going to come across and just basically sketch around the outside somewhere like so, fairly crudely, so roughly round to the sort of top of the leaf. And then I'm going to hit the space bar now and then come back down to the other end, and we're just going to come into the shape here and then sort of round the outside, and then finally round to the front. So we've got our two sort of angular vectors that we now need to smooth. So if we come into selecting the first one then and go into the node editing mode, we can see that we've got 3 points that we need to smooth. And I can do that by right mouse key over the individual point and saying smooth point, or similarly I can go over the top of the point and hit S, and I'll do the same for the final point. I will just tweak the tangency in and out of the first and last points to make it nice and smooth, and then come across to the second vector, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points that I want to smooth. And what I can do is just use the shift, hold the shift key down, and then just box pick over those points so they'll highlight in red, and then I hit just S on the keyboard and I'll get that nice smooth vector I've been looking for. Once again, just a little bit of tweaking on the first and last point just so we get the nice flow in and out of the leaf. Okay, so with that, I'm now sort of want to move into creating the profile for that will be the cross section for the 2-rail sweep. So I'm going to go across to the ellipse command and just basically sort of stretch out a shape now. So we're going to stretch out a shape that happens to be 1 inch in width, and we're going to go a height of 0.3. So I'm just using the sort of smart snapping to get that size. So we're just going to get that roughly, and in this case I'll just tweak that down through the form to 0.3 and apply and close that out. I'm going to need to remove the 2 bottom spans, so whilst it's selected I'll hit N on the keyboard to go into the node editing mode, and I'm going to remove this span by right mouse key over the span, delete span, or similarly I could do that with hitting D on the keyboard. So we've got our cross section shape, we've got our 2 rails, so now we can move ahead and create the surface. So what I'm going to do now is just select the 2 vectors. Okay, so I'm going to come in and pick the first and the second, and notice I'm picking this top profile first. That will make quite an important change to the surface. So I have selected that top one as the first vector, and come into modeling now, select the 2-rail sweep, hit the use selection straight away since I've already selected the 2 rails, and just check the direction is running correctly in both. That is good. We're going to scale cross sections with width to make sure that we get a slightly more bulbous section in the wider areas and lower in the narrower areas. We're not scaling to height, and we're going to be adding this, and in this case this is going to be called leaf 1, and we're just going to now select the cross section and apply. And we've got our underlying shape. Best now to see that in 3D, so I'm just going to tile the 2D and 3D vertically, and we can see that shape there. So we've got the 3D model on the right hand side representing that 2-rail sweep surface. Now at the moment I think this is a little bit on the boring side. It's just a sort of general sort of convex shape that we've got here, although it does taper down to the narrowing of the leaf. So what I'd like to do is, whilst we're in this sort of midway through this mode, I'm going to go into and select that top sort of cross section vector, go into the node editing now and make a tweak to that center point there by just taking hold of the tangency and rotating it down now, which will give this sort of wave. Okay, I might just tweak that a little further, and once I'm happy with that, come back to the command and hit apply. Okay, so now we've added in this sort of wave that's a lot more sculptural and in keeping with sort of the shape of a leaf, although we do need to add in some sort of undulations on top and the vein, of course. So I'm happy with that, so I'm going to close out the form, and just get rid of the bit of the data that's outside of the perimeter of the leaf. So with that, I'm going to select the 3D model, which I've selected in the 2D view, shift and pick the vector, and come across to the modeling tools here and select the clear area of selected component outside selected vectors, and just hit that now, and that will trim that out, leaving our nice underlying leaf shape. Now whilst that's selected, we ought to think about adding sort of an undulating contour on top of this. So I'm going to come up to the create shape from vector outlines and select the sort of curve profile option. And rather than it being positive, we're going to go in with a negative shape here of -30. Okay, we're going to put no limit to the height, and we're going to give this a leaf 2 as being the shape, as being the name, and just we're going to basically add this negative shape on top of the underlying leaf. So if we apply that now, you'll see that we get that sort of dipping in the model on the right hand side to give it that sort of bit of curvature that we were looking for. So I'm quite happy that we've added that correctly. And now I'm going to go ahead and create another shape. So I'm going to start new component now, and then we can move across and call this leaf 3. So there'd be 3 components to this leaf, and we're going to use a raised profile rather than the -30. We're going to go +50. Okay, once again, just come across, select the vector, and we're just going to apply that on top now. Once again, you can see here we are adding this on top, and we can see the underlying sort of vein that's running down through the top there. So we've pieced this together as 3 separate components. So I'm just going to close out the form now. We can appreciate the leaf there on the right hand side, but at the moment it looks a little bit not very organic. We've got some quite sharp lines between different items, so we could do with applying some smoothing. So to do that very easily, I'm going to come across and select the bottom leaf 1, and then pick the shift and just select all 3 of them. So all 3 are selected now, and I'm going to come up to the command here to apply smoothing to selected components, and it's immediately going to warn me that the component must be baked. Okay, so we need to consider this all as one entity to apply the smoothing. So I'm going to hit OK on that, and you can see it's created just 1 model from the 3, and we're now going to just modify the smoothing. If I move this all the way up, you can see the smoothing increases. If I move it all the way down, we get basically the model we started with. So I'm going to go basically just under 50, around about the sort of 45 mark, and we get, once again, just a nice rounding on the edges of the leaf, and of course in the transition of our leaf onto the top of the vein on the top of the leaf. So I'm going to OK that now, and we've got our leaf there. I'm just going to rename that and call that just leaf, and we're going to need to look to take this model across from this session of Aspire into our existing. So I'm going to select it from the tree now and just right mouse key copy, and then we're just going to come into the other session of Aspire and just paste that onto the screen. So I'm going to right mouse key paste. We can see that shown on the 2D view there, and if we have a look at the horizontal view tiled, you can see that we've also got that in the 3D view. But what I need to do is center the leaf over the existing vector. It's in the wrong location at the moment. So what I'm going to do is, whilst that's selected, I'm going to shift and pick the vector from the 2D view. You can see I've added that vector now, and come across to the transform objects. Okay, and the align selected objects. I'm not going to pick the align to material, but actually the line to selection. And what I want to do is I want to put my 3D model inside the center of the selected vector. So with that, I hit that, and you can see that's moved the model in both the 2D and the 3D and is correctly located. Okay, so we've dealt with the leaf. We now ought to consider how we're going to be modeling the acorn. So let's take a closer look at the 2D view and zoom in and take a look at the acorn vectors. Now, if we select the outer vector and the stalk, we can look in the bottom right hand corner to see the approximate dimensions, which are 0.87 of an inch in width and just over an inch in height. So if we create a new Aspire project, then we ought to make it an inch in width and maybe 1.5 in height. So with that, I'm going to start a new session of Aspire. and we're going to create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to be just 1 inch in width, 1.5 in height, and all the other parameters are the same, and okay that. I'm just going to flip back to the other project, and we're just going to copy those now. So I'll copy those and come back. In fact, I need to select all the vectors actually. So I'll pick all of those items there and copy and come back and paste. And we can see that they're not appearing on the screen, because if we zoom out now, we can see they are off to the left based upon the position they were exported from with respect to the coordinate system. So let's just bring that into the center of our workpiece using the alignment tools, and now we can see we're ready to start building our acorn. Okay, so we've got a number of vectors here, and just like we did with the leaf, each of them will form a different shape, and we're combining these all together to create the final form. So the first thing we're going to deal with really is the underlying sort of shell that we've got here, and then we're going to add the acorn to it, and then the stalk onto that, and then obviously the grooves then to give it the true desired acorn effect. So I have the vector already selected here, and I'm now going to come across and come up to the modeling tools, create to the shape editor. We're going to create this at about 60 degrees to give it a good rounding shape. No limit on the final height, and this is going to be called shell. And just apply. So we'll see that in the 3D view. If we tile, and there we can see the initial start point for our acorn. Now what we're going to do now is to limit this sort of bulbous shape back to create a sort of the sort of the vertical face of the shell. So I'm going to close out that form now, select the 3D model, and then select the vector I want to trim to. Okay, and then come over and use the same tool we used before, where it's going to clear all the data outside of the vector. So we've trimmed that away now, which gives us this nice sort of vertical face. And now we can think about adding the sort of main acorn into that. So that's what I'll do next. I'll pick the main sort of shape we've got here and come back into the shape editor. Okay, and we'll look to, in this case, not add it to this particular shape, but actually to merge it into it. So we're going to select the merge option here. I'm happy with the 60% shape profile, and we're going to call this acorn, and we're just going to apply that now, and we'll see that take form in the 3D view. So you can see that's nicely sort of merging in to that shell shape, giving this sort of natural sort of vertical face that we have here. So next we need to consider the stalk really, and how that sort of merges in to the main acorn. So we're going to start a new component now, and this is going to be called stalk. Okay, and we're going to come up to the shape profile and just steepen that now up to 70 angle. All the other parameters stay the same. Merge, and we just need to select the vector, of course, and then apply, and we'll see that sort of stalk nicely merging in to the sort of shell part of the acorn. Now finally we need to consider really the what will give the realistic look to the acorn, which is to give these sort of long elongated shapes, vectors, some sort of a natural undulating form. So I'm going to start a new component again. This is going to be called, I'll call it detail. Okay, and then we'll just pick those items there, making sure that we don't select any other vectors. I need to shift and pick the other one. Whoops, if I just box pick those again, we should get all of those. So I'm happy with that, and we're going to in this case subtract it. So I'm just going to hit subtract, and we can now apply that. So that will be added into that shape there, so we can see that we've nicely sort of created an acorn there with some fairly simple profiles, but it's the key thing is to know how they're going to interlink together. And like you say, you could see the way we created the oversized shell to start with, and then cut it back to create the vertical face. So you just have to think a bit more literally about the tools that you've got in Aspire and the way you're going to create those forms. So I'm just going to close out the form now, and although the sort of shape does look quite realistic, it still lacks a little bit of that sort of organic feel because we've got some quite sharp edges. So with that now, I'm just going to take those 4 components and just give them a smoothing. So I'm going to come up to the apply smoothing filter. Okay, it's going to warn me that it's going to bake them into a single component, but I'm fine with that. And then we've got the slider, which will allow us to vary. So whether I want full max, but as you can see, it's washing a little bit out there. So I'm going to go maybe just under halfway, which will give us this nice sort of slightly smooth shape, ready for it to be used in the main part. So I'm going to OK that now. And at this point, I just go and rename that. So this is going to be called Acorn. And rather than actually what we did before, which was to essentially copy the model across, I'm actually going to save this part now. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and we're going to call this Acorn Model. So we're going to save it as a CRV 3D file, so an Aspire modeling file. And I'm now going to just come back into my existing part. Okay, just going to close out from where we were and just have it full centered view, and come up to the modeling tools here and to our import a component or 3D model, and we're going to select the new Acorn model that we have there, and we can see that's being presented in the 2D view there. And if we have a look by tiling these horizontally, we can see also it in the 3D view. And we need to now modify the Acorn to get it into its correct location. But of course we don't have one outer perimeter representing the Acorn shape, so we can't use the align central to the selected vector. But that's not a problem, because actually we can go into the alignment tools here, and I'm going to shift now and pick the larger sort of Acorn vector there, and then we've got the align to selection modes. So rather than using the center options, we can use the inside edge options, and I'm going to align the model to the far left hand edge, which I can there, and then I'm going to align it to the bottom of the vector. So now we've actually just moved that into the correct location, and we can close that out. I'm just going to rename that now as Acorn, get rid of the model, which comes across from importing it from the 3D file, and we're left with our two models. And now we can move on to start looking at the branch. Okay, so let's zoom in now to the 3D view and get that ready for where the branch is. Come up and select the vector and go over to the modeling tools, to the shape editor. And we're going to use the curve profile again, but just lower the angle down to 50. Base height we'll keep at 0 for the minute and no limit. And this will be, of course, branch. And we'll now apply that. So we can see that we've got quite a nice shape, but it's not transitioning into either the leaf or the acorn correctly, and that's due to the fact that we are adding this rather than merging. So let's merge that in now, and we can see we get a better transition there, although we are going to look to make some modifications to the leaf and the acorn at a later date to get a better transition. Now if I rotate that, it's still essentially the branch doesn't come out of the page quite as much as we would like, and I don't really want to apply any extra angle. So the best way of really giving it a bit more prominence is to just lift it a little out of the page. So with that, I'm going to come back over to the base height here and just add in an extra 30 thou, okay, and just reapply that, and we'll see that's just lifted the branch out of the page, so it gives it a little bit more of a sharper edge, and we can of course round this at a later date anyway. So that certainly helped lift that branch, and now we can look to really create the rest of the acorn and leaves to create the completed branch. So with that, I'm just going to close out of that form now, and we'll come back to our full 2D view, and we can look to see what we're going to do next about creating copies of these items to complete the overall shape. Okay, so we're going to select the acorn and the leaf to start with and just put them into transform mode, and then hold the control key down on the keyboard and the alt key. In other words, we're going to make a copy, but when I move them, I just want to move them orthogonally, in this case in -X. So I'm going to hold that down now, the alt key on the keyboard, and hold the left mouse key down and just move my cursor to the left, which is going to make a copy. Just going to clear the acorn there, and that will have made a copy. And now going to just shift to deselect the acorn out of the selection, which will just have my leaf then, and I will then make another copy of this. So once again, holding the Control key down and the Alt, and then just moving this across to the left. And then finally, we're going to make another copy where I'm just going to hold the Control key down now and just move that out. And it's going to be a leaf that we're going to place at the end. So I'm not really worried about its location at the moment. We'll deal with that in a minute. So with that, I now need to come back and just deselect all the sort of 3 leaves and the 2 acorns. So I'm just going to select those now, and we're going to take those and mirror those across to the other side. So with that, I have the 5 items selected. Come up to the transform objects and select the mirror mode, and we're going to create a mirrored copy. We're not going to flip around the job center. We're just going to flip around the center of the components themselves, and we're going to flip vertical. So I'm going to flip that now, which will sort of see them sit on top of each other. And then we're going to simply take that. So hold the Alt key down, and we're going to just simply hold the left mouse key down and then move them up into the part sort of above the top part of the branch, and let go. Okay, so with that, we've moved those out the way. But if I actually close this down now and we look at this and tile horizontally, we can actually see that our top sort of leaves and acorns are hanging off the top of the page because we need to sort of recenter it vertically. So with that, I'm now going to just select all the components from the tree on the left hand side. Okay, so make sure they're all highlighted, and then come up to the transform objects and use the align to material, but rather than aligning its center, we just want to keep it in the sort of same X but move it basically in Y. So I'm going to sort of move that down now. Okay, so that will then sort of get them better located, and now we can start to look at actually individually moving these items into the correct location. Okay, so we're going to close out of this form and then just do a little tidying here. We've got the vectors now, which are clearly in the wrong location, and we could do with storing them away. So I'm going to box pick these icons on the screen. So we should just be able to pick up just those vectors now. Okay, plus obviously the top branch. And I'm going to right mouse key now and move to layer, new layer. And I'm going to call this vectors. Okay, and we're just going to switch that layer off, and okay, so now that removes from the screen. So the next stage really is to start moving and rotating the individual sort of leaves and acorns to create a better shape. So for that, I'm just going to expand the 3D view now, and we're going to come in and just individually move these items into location. So let's take the first leaf here. So I'm just going to double click to select it, and then click again to put it into the sort of transform mode, and we can start making the alterations. I'm going to sort of slightly reduce this down in size, and I'm going to apply some rotation and just move this out a little further. Okay, and just maybe change the size a little bit more. Okay, so we're now getting to a place where I'm sort of happy with that one. Going to come across to the acorn as once again, just double click to select it, and then click again to put it into transform mode. And I'm just going to change the size a little, move that in. Okay, coming across to the next one, double click and just change the size. And I'm going to move that back out now because we've got quite a big overlap, and I need to apply some rotation here. So I'm just going to rotate that round, and then we can move again. Okay, and I come across to the acorn now, and once again I'm just going to sort of move that in, and I'm not going to change the shape too much on that one. And then we've got the leaf on the end here, and once again just going to change the size and move that back out, and we're going to definitely apply some rotation here. Just bring that round and then just transition that out a little bit more there. Okay, coming up to the top now, and we're going to once again just change the size, and we're going to do some rotation. Okay, so just bring that into play, and we've got that crossing over quite nicely. Same with that acorn, a bit on the big side, so I'm just going to reduce that down, move that down to here, and we're definitely going to apply some rotation now. So just bring that round, place that back up. Okay, and I'm happy with that. and the next leaf, and we'll just move that down, apply some rotation, move it back up. Okay, and the last of the acorns, and just once again just change the size and the rotation and transition that back into the branch, and then the final leaf on the top, move that up, give it a rotate, and then that's transitioning back in quite nicely, and maybe just move that down a little bit. Okay, so with that we've done the sort of core 3 leaves and 2 acorns on both sides, but we're left with the leaf at the end here that we need to do something with. And now for that, of course, if I pick this item and then try and rotate it into the correct shape, so I'm just going to rotate it through 180 here and then move this up and try and get it roughly positioned correctly at the end, maybe just change its size a little bit as well. We're not really going to get this nicely transitioning into the end of the branch here without really applying some more drastic distortion tools. So that's where we're going to go with next. We're going to select this and come into the transform object. So I'm just going to tile horizontally now so we can see these together, and we can just zoom in to the 2D view, and we'll also zoom in to the 3D view so we can see both being worked on together. So now I'm going to come up to the distortion tool, okay, and immediately I'm going to select the bounding box option and apply. Now we can see on the screen that we've got quite a large perimeter box because it's remembering the orientation of the item before we actually rotated it. So what I need to do now is to sort of resize that bounding box, and I can do that by selecting Bake Distortion. So I'm going to select Bake Distortion now, and it warns me the component will be baked and that we are going to sort of recreate the bounding box, but I'm happy with that. And now I can come back in now and reapply, and we can see that we've got the new bounding box. Okay, so with that I can now start to distort this bounding box, which will in turn distort the 3D view. So as I move this up now, you can see that's changing the shape of the leaf in the 2D and the 3D view. But in this case, I'm just going to come undo with that and just take out the extra point. And actually what we need to do on both these sides is turn them into Bezier curves. So with that, I'm going to right mouse key over that span and change to Bezier on both, and do the same on the bottom side. And we can start to now sort of distort this. So with this, I'm just going to sort of raise this up and do the same on the top edge here. Okay, in fact, what we want to do is go the other way. So I'm actually going to come down this way, which will flatten out this sort of piece here. And I'm actually going to sort of just slightly distort that up now. So we've got that sort of transitioning quite nicely into the branch now. And I'm going to just bring this out this way and maybe distort a little bit on that side as well. Okay, so we've created a unique sort of new leaf based upon our existing. So I'm sort of happy with how that's sort of almost transitioning there. So I'm going to close out that form, I'm pleased. And I'm just going to just select it again and then just maybe just move it now just slightly. So it's just on the edge of that end of the branch. Okay, so we've applied the general sort of rotation and moving, but of course we still need to think about really how these items are all blending in with the main branch. If we have a look now, we can clearly see that we need to address that all of them are coming in at the very base of the branch, and ideally we have these items sort of joining at different heights into this branch. So we ought to think about tools in which we can start to manipulate and add a little bit of individualism to each of these acorns and leaves. And to do that, we're actually going to use the properties of each of the components and change the tilt. Okay, so with that now, I'm just going to just come into the main view here and just rotate. We're going to deal with the lower ones first. So I'm just going to rotate this and zoom in so we can see. We're going to affect them in the 2D view, but I want to see the change in the 3D view. Okay, so I'm just going to just zoom that out now, and we're going to come across and select the first of our leaves, which will be the right hand leaf here. And we can see there that we're sort of just transitioning in, and we could do with raising a little bit more height here. So I don't want to lift the whole leaf up. I'm just going to tilt it from the bottom towards the top and just lift the sort of branch part of the leaf as it transitions into the main branch. So with that, I'm just going to come into and select the actual leaf that I want to affect. And I'm going to come into the properties from the modeling tools. It can also be accessed from the menu, right mouse key properties, or even from the 3D view. So as we come into here, it's giving us the shape height and the base height, which is currently on the 0 plane. But the thing that I'm most interested here is the tilt. So I'm going to tilt this now, and I'm going to set this by tilting from roughly the sort of tip towards the base, and I'm going to add maybe just say a 0.4, and we'll just see. Now if you have a look in this view here, it's just lifted up nicely and it's transitioning in, so I'm pleased with that. I'm going to come to the Acorn now, and once again just tilt that, set the direction, and then we're going to apply, say, in this case, I think maybe a 0.5, and we'll see what we get. Okay, that looks nice. Come across the next leaf, and we'll just apply maybe a slightly smaller one here, and we're going to come across there and apply, say, 0.3. Okay, that's tilting nicely. And now the next Acorn, and tilt that. And maybe we're going to go up by 0.5 on this one. Okay, and then the final leaf, so I'll select that again and tilt, set the direction, and apply maybe a 0.3 here. Okay, and then what we're going to do now is just select the top leaf, but what I'm going to do is just rotate my 3D view here so we can see the effect on the top edge of the branch, and we're going to just lower that down and tilt, set that from the tip to the base, and we're going to give that, say, a 0.4. Okay, so it just lifts that up, maybe a little bit high there, lower that down to 0.3. Okay, and we'll do the same with the Acorn, and just going to tilt that, set that from there down to the base, and give 0.3. Okay, maybe a little more, actually 0.5. Okay, looks good. Next leaf. And we're just going to work our way along, adding sort of a unique and sort of blended effect. So it's giving a little bit more realism really to the whole job. And this may be 0.4. Okay, and then across to the next Acorn, which I'll just tilt again, set the direction, and 0.5 I think in this case. And then finally the end leaf. Okay, so we're just going to come down to there, tilt again, set from top to bottom, and maybe apply something like just a 0.2 on this one, I think. Okay, so I'm happy with the sort of changes that we've made so that we've got sort of uneven transitions of these items into the branch. Okay, so I'm just going to close out that form now and come into the sort of main 3D view, and we can see here that actually what I'd like to do is to improve the blends. At the moment it's still a little bit blunt, and we could do with maybe applying some smoothing could sort that out maybe. So what we'll do now is I'll just do a little bit of tidying up of my componentry here, and I'm going to rename this level to be sort of branch parts. Okay, so I'm going to call this branch parts. Okay, and we're going to create a new level now called finished model. So I'm going to say insert new level. I'm going to come up and rename that, and we'll call that finished model. Okay, and what I need to do now is take all those items that we've got on the screen and sort of squash them together and make them a single component under my finished model level. Well, that's easy to do here. I need to make sure that everything's displayed that I want to be made into a single model, and I simply come up, I select the model, the level, and then I'm going to come in and just create component from visible model, and that will have created a new one in, as you can see there, copy of visible model. I'm just going to switch that original branch parts off, And I'm going to rename this one just to be called, say, branch 1, because we're going to have 2 branches at the end. Branch 1. Okay, so with that, I'm ready to now maybe start applying some smoothing. So I have it selected in my component tree. I can come up to the apply smoothing. And this is going to do it over the whole model. And as you can see, it just basically is applying too much blend. So I might want to blend the actual sort of transition here, but as a net effect, I'm blending too many areas that I want to protect. So that's not the best tool to use here. So what I'm going to do is just close out of that now and not keep any of those changes, and look to really apply some more unique hand sculpting in just the certain areas. So what I'm going to do now is just rotate the model into the best area to do that. So I'm going to do sort of both sides here. So we're going to do the front side first, and then I'm going to come up, select the model in the tree, come up to the sculpt visible model, and we're now going to use a smoothing. Going to just, as you can see my cursor there and the diameters, I'm just going to tweak this down a little bit now. My sort of strength is okay at about halfway, and I'm just going to come in now and just basically, just as you can see, they're just sort of transitioning that where that end of the acorn meets the branch, and we're just getting a nice smooth transition between those two. Okay, and I'm just going to just tweak that there. So I'm happy with that. I'm just going to go back into the twiddle mode now and just zoom over to the other side. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of tweak that to see the other side, and then come back to the smooth. Okay, and maybe just reduce that down a little bit there. Just transition that bottom one there, and again on that top branch. Okay, and we're sort of starting to get a little bit more of a nicer organic shape here, and I'm happy with that. So I'm going to keep all the changes and just okay that. So with that now, we've sort of got a much better form. We've got quite a nice way the different items are transitioning into our branch at different heights, and we've now sort of sorted out the nice sort of smooth transition into that branch. So let's go back now and just have a look at the main view, and now we need to think about really mirroring this across. But one thing I'm not that pleased with is the end of my branch. It just doesn't look like the end of a branch would be if it had been broken off. So what I'm going to do is use these sculpting tools again. So select the branch, come up to the sculpt tool, and in this case we're going to pick smudge. So I'm just going to sort of slightly increase the diameter here, and I'm just going to sort of push this up. So I'm going to push it in. Okay, and just keep pushing it in, and then just push it up as well. So I'm trying to sort of create sort of almost like a divot in the end, as if it's sort of been broken off. So it's just going to be pushed up like so, and just a little bit more. Okay, and I'm going to keep those now, keep okay, and then we're just going to sort of zoom out, and as you can see there, we've got a sort of much better look, as if that's sort of been broken off essentially. Okay, so I'm happy now that this particular model is right for us to sort of mirror to the other side. So just going to look down on top of the job. We're going to come over now and select the model that we want to mirror. And I'm going to come over and say mirror selected objects. So in this case, we want to flip around job center is correct. Okay. And we want to create a mirrored copy, and we're going to flip horizontal. So with that, we flipped across to the other side, and we can close out, and everything seems to be okay. But if you take a closer look, we've got this nasty transition here, okay, because at the moment branch 1 brackets 1, basically the second model within our tree there, is being added on to branch 1. So one thing I am going to do is just name this branch 2. So clearly we've got branch 1 and branch 2. And I need to change the way branch 2 transitions into branch 1. So we're going to change the combine mode to merge. But of course, that still isn't how the branches would lie. You can see clearly here we've got sort of this intersection type look, and really we would have one branch laying on top of the other. So what I'm going to do now is just tilt branch 2 as if it's laying over the top of branch 1. So I'm going to simply come into the horizontal view here. We're going to look at the 2D view here and the 3D view below, and I have the model selected, so I can just simply come into the properties, okay, and we are going to apply some tilt. So I'm going to set that from the tip down to the base here, and we're just going to apply maybe, let's say 0.6. Let's see what we get with 0.6 to start with. Okay, we can see that. Now if I'm going to tilt that just to see how far that's tilting, and I think we tilted it a little bit too much, we can probably bring that down to about 0.4. Okay, and let's lower it down, maybe even just 0.3. Okay, that's good. We're just sitting that branch on top, and if I close out that form now and have the 3D view full and have a look straight on top, we should see that we've got really an excellent finished model. So I'm happy with that as a finished piece, and I can now come up to File, Save As, and we are going to save this as basically the oak branch model. Okay, so I'm going to select that now and save that as a project.